it raises questions. Just like the tradition of witnesses of Adim, Adot, traditionally it's knowledgeable male Jews. What if they're not so knowledgeable? What if they're not so male? What if they're not so Jewish? Raises interesting questions that certainly liberal clergy like Gila and Ramon and Jerry and I may be missing some on just this call, and like Toba and Yael and some others in some of your families, we deal with this stuff all the time. Again, it's all cousins. So Ushpizin starts with dead Jews. I'm going to create a network model in the annals of Jewish environmentalism, but you'll see it's not just Jewish. And I'm going to invite you to think about what names you would add to, because the idea here, as I just walk through a quick sample of Ushpizin, and then we're going to toss it wide open, is, okay, so who do they invite? Right? How much richer this gets and how quickly exponentially large this becomes, right? If at each layer of my invitation, you have someone that then gets invited, and instead of 1, it's 30, and then instead of 2, it's 900, right, et cetera. And pretty soon we're up to humanity and we're up to the world. And that's the value of thinking in network web of creation terms. Just today was a sort of reunion of a lot of the Jewish environmental world because Chazon was featuring live Torah from England that people were logging on all over. And among the people who was on it was Ellen Bernstein. I wonder how many of you have met Ellen at some point. I figured there'd be more than just Jerry. I'm not saying, I think Gila thought so. Right, and I can't see everyone's hands all at once, so I'm sorry if I missed some. In 1988, Ellen was a secular environmental outdoor educator in Philadelphia who had an idea that we needed a movement, right? And a movement often begins with an organization. We needed a group that would specifically do environmental work in the Jewish community. There had never been such a thing, narrowly defined. Broadly speaking, of course, these values are present in so much of the Zionist endeavor, so much of a lot of American Judaism, but specifically a Jewish environmental group. And she found a ready host in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Wincombe, Pennsylvania, that gave her a dumpy little room in the basement for almost nothing. And that was where Shomrei Adamah, Guardians of the Earth, was born in 1988. 1989, I had the good fortune of being a college student who was following Arthur Waskow around. He was like my, the person who I met in college of like, oh my God, that's a Judaism that I can actually embrace. So I was staying at Arthur and Phyllis's home as a college student and attending the first ever Jewish Environmental Conference, which was in Memorial Day weekend, 1989. And Arthur and Ellen, two of the real founders of this movement, and many others were there. And so I have the honor of being the youngest there from the beginning Jewish environmental organizational activist. So I say all that because I wasn't sure where I'd start, but I saw Ellen today live on this call, and it was wonderful, along with lots of other very amazing teachers in this movement that has grown exponentially, thank God. I'm inviting Ellen because without her work, right, there wouldn't necessarily be a Jewish environmental movement, because out of Shomrei Adamah came COJL, Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life, and came the Teva Learning Center. And out of that came Adamah, right? And then Chazon grew out of the fields that those groups had helped to open up, and the legacies just go on. And there's such a rich movement out there now. So I'm inviting a live Jew and a woman, significantly, right, for my first invitation. because Sukkot is, exactly as Ramon said, a festival of our interdependence with nature, right? The schach is supposed to cover less or roughly about what it exposes. And we are in it together. So if there's toxins in the air, we breathe them. But if it's a beautiful, cool, crisp fall day and the air is sustaining and COVID-free and smog-free, then we breathe deep and easy right now. So it is a festival of interdependence. It is a festival of interconnection. So Ellen is my first. And if anyone wants to use the chat, you can, we could have it lively that way. So in terms of who has influenced you and your corner of the environmental world around our connection with nature, Jewish or otherwise, let that be your first invitation. Right. I don't know that I can monitor chat or raise hands and do this in a reasonable amount of time, but we'll figure this out. So as anyone else is seeing it, like, Gila or Ramon, if you want to call a few out, feel free. Please.
I'd be happy to do that in a moment, but first I want to do my own Azamin Lesudati. Ushpizin Elaine, I'd like to invite to our Suda, to our Sukkah, a supernal heavenly guest. And I want to mention someone from Shirat HaNefesh, Linda Sobel Katz, who was an activist and an incredible force for all kinds of things in Silver Spring, but including Trees for the Future, which she introduced me to, and which has really sparked my attention and interest as an incredible way of making a difference in the world, of planting massive numbers of trees in Africa, where people are most vulnerable to climate change, among the most vulnerable.
Amen. Thank you. And I saw someone flash Everett Gendler. I think that was Jerry. Amen, amen. Another one of the real founders of this field, along with Reb Zalman and a few other particularly influential early voices. The further back we go, the harder it is to maintain gender equity, because history is too often not herstory. But when I go back, I'm gonna front load the modern period with a number of important women, because through Ellen, I can imagine that she might want to invite Annie Dillard for, right? How many have read Annie Dillard? Okay, so she lived in Southwest Virginia. She was a nature writer, and on a little farm with a creek in Southwest Virginia called Tinker Creek. And she was a pilgrim in her own land. And she wrote a book called Pilgrim of Tinker Creek in 1974, which is one of the absolute classics of American nature writing. And she has this great passage, which we've actually used in services at Adat Shalom around the Yotzer as like a liturgical insert, where she talks about the riotous color and the expression of all this creativity of flora and fauna, and ends with the line, "The creator loves pizzazz." I just love that quote, right? So it's theology. And it's in our rough eco-region, a couple hundred miles away, but similar. And so we invite her. And even more locally from Silver Spring, Nan and I were thinking on the same lines at exactly the same time. Her home, where she wrote Silent Spring and lived much of her last years of life, is in Burnt Mills, not far from Trader Joe's off 29, just above the Beltway. And she's actually buried at Park Lawn in Rockville. I have done heat patchout on her grave. Like, we are close to greatness, because of course Rachel Carson, with actually her work before 1962, helped open Americans' eyes to the intricacy first of oceans, and then of the world and ultimately of its vulnerability. And we've never seen this since, but when the establishment is threatened by a woman who is speaking truth to power, they do this amazing thing and they smear her. And they, mispronounce her name, and they discredit her academics, etc. It's an unbelievable smear campaign that she had to endure at the hands of the chemical industries, because she was speaking truth to power, bringing scientific fact to an establishment that sometimes doesn't want to hear scientific facts. Thank God we've gotten better at that lately. Yeah. Mask up, people. And so as both an example of what of the science, as an example of the popularizing of truth and the ability to get fact in a way that also touches emotion. And because her final book, after 1962 Silent Spring broke open the modern environmental set of concerns, when she died 2.5 years later, she was working on a book that has wonder in the title. And it so beautifully overlaps with what Heschel was writing at exactly the same time, right? One of Heschel's compilations is called I Asked for Wonder. And I believe Carson's book was called The Sense of Wonder. And they so beautifully parallel each other. So with Annie Dillard and with Rachel Carson, we get theologically inspired, but often secular views of nature that fill out our sense of relationship with data and with emotion, with the taxonomy of what is what and what it needs to survive, and also the majesty and the wonder of stepping back and not worrying about what kind of bird or what kind of tree, but having a Buberian I-thou moment with nature. While we're at it, let's invite Buber, because in 1923, he wrote I and Thou, right, Ich und Du, he has various examples of what an I-thou relationship can be. And one obviously is with a person. Pop quiz for anyone. What are the other creatures or non-creatures that Buber uses in I and Thou to talk about what a true mutual relationship can be? Anyone? Chat box or otherwise?
Scott's got his hand up.
Yeah, well, he does. I mean, I've read this out in public forums. He does have a whole thing about a tree, relationship with a tree, which is, I think, what you're getting at.
That's part of what I'm getting at. So he has 3 other examples. One is a tree, one is a cat. Sorry for dog people, he goes with a cat. And one is a rock. I-thou relationship with animal, vegetable, and mineral. I-thou relationship with human and non-human. 1923. And Buber, though he's writing in Germany before he makes Aliyah as a refugee, might well, because he was so worldly, might have known of some important American voices like Henry David Thoreau, right? And then where does it go back from there? Well, part of the beauty of Ushpizin, and part of the beauty of thinking in web terms, is each of them gets to invite theirs, and each of you gets to invite yours. So with my very partial list that connects via my lived experience and one of my personal teachers and heroes who's still very much active and living, and then to a network of people, many of whom have gone before, all of whom have something very holy and something very consonant with Judaism, all of whose work has amplified my Jewish identity, but most of whom were not Jewish. And Ushpizin invites us to question the boundaries. Do I only have to invite those 7 guys, right? Or even those 7 gals who were put up to rectify the androcentrism of just those 7 men, right? And then if I go further, do they have to be Jewish? Do they have to be ancient? Do they have to be dead, etc.? So inviting us to think in terms of a web on this festival that is devoted to interdependence and vulnerability and interconnection. I'll wrap up with a piece about water, but I want to toss it open here. So let's hear a few more invitations, because part of the beauty of a web is, even though there's at least 5 now rabbis on this call, there's wisdom everywhere. And that's the beauty of a network and a web, is it's not just by dint of position or graduate school education or ordination that you get to share. Thank God we live in a more lateral era. So I'll shut up here, and please unmute and share. I see John, thank you. Yes, there's a lot of consonance with UU thought and with Emerson and Thoreau at the heart of so much of this. Yes. For those who don't know, the UUA has 7 basic principles, and the 7th principle is the interdependent web of all existence, or something like that. And they have a group called the 7th Principle Project, which is the UUA equivalent of shomrei adamah.
Well, I know I do have a rabbinic degree, but I still want to chime in here and say that I would love to invite to my sukkah Mary Oliver, her spirit, because not only do I adore her poetry and does she open up the world of nature in such exquisite ways, but she just seems like someone who would be wonderful to have over for a meal. So that would be my vote. Anybody else? Scott, are you? I can't see if you're, nope. Anybody want to put a hand up digitally or actual hands? Another Unitarian, right?
Great.
Cliff?
But I'd like to mention, oh my Lord, all of a sudden her name escapes me. Oh Lord, the poet in Wellfleet, Massachusetts.
Marge Piercy.
Exactly, exactly. I think that her writing is very connected with what we've been discussing, and we should invite her.
Nice. As many of you know, the Reconstructionist prayer book actually has both Marge Piercy and Mary Oliver in it. That's so while I say we need to go beyond denominations, there's also something powerful about being part of a group that is willing to print voices like that in their holy documents. So, but it's kind of diversity and unity and that dance, right?
So I had a boss at the National Science Foundation who years ago was actually Dan Quayle's chief of staff. So you would never expect him to end up where he ended up. But over time, when I worked for him, he had me make a whole video series on climate change, and left National Science Foundation and is now the head of something called Climate Nexus, and is trying to tell the entire world what the real story is on climate change. So Jeff Nesbitt, I invite.
My gosh, thank you, Cliff. I knew Climate Nexus. I didn't know the story behind. Wow, that's amazing. Great group. They do technical support and PR and stuff like that for the large swath of the environmental movement.
So I would, am I on here? I would invite David and Joan Ehrenfeld, who are professors at Rutgers. In 1980, actually 8 years before Shomrei Adamah, we had a Jewish environmental conference that they were the inspiration for me when I was a Hillel rabbi there. And we had a little young guy who had just started college named David Seidenfeld.
Seidenberg.
Seidenberg, who came to this conference, inspired by them, by Richie Schwartz and John Wolfe, 2 other living, wonderful Jewish environmentalists to go into his field. So there's a web of people but it came from a faculty, non-rabbinic faculty, ecologists on the faculty at Rutgers, David and Joan Ehrenfeld. He wrote a book called The Arrogance of Humanism, 1980, 1979.
Yep. And it has held up 40 years later. He co-wrote with another rabbi of Gerald's generation, Philip Bentley, a very important article in the early 80s in Jewish environmental terms. Yeah, David Ehrenfeld, very important voice. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I was going to suggest David Seidenberg because his writing has been so powerful for me and really opens up so much of our tradition in ways I never expected. How about one more? Heidi, going to let you have one more and then
Oh, thanks. Okay. So I would mention Ansel Adams. He didn't use words, but he used photographs. And he inspired so many people to create the national parks and, you know, to save the environment that that exists in this country.
Nice. Amen. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that we're running out of time. Although I could listen to Rabbi Fred talk all evening, it would
No,
be such a
please don't.
treat. But I know you have to go also. But you know what this has shown me, and I wasn't sure where you were going with this, but what I see from this is not only the interconnectedness, but how important each person can be, right? It is something we all want to engage in and help out, but really some individuals have just made such a huge difference, and we can aspire to be that and to take their examples to heart and do everything we can do. And I think you exemplify this, Rabbi Fred, that you really have made a difference in the Jewish community, in the world at large, with taking up and leading us in environmentalism awareness and action. And you've been a great inspiration to me as well. So I thank you so much for being here with us this evening on this wonderful Ushpizin. And I'm wondering if Chazan Ramon might usher us out of the sukkah with a song, if you would.
Yeah, sure. I was thinking about all this beauty of being together and connected and interconnected. And there are this beautiful phrase of Prophet Isaiah that says, Ki beiti bet tfilah, ikare lechol ha'amim, that because my home, it may be a home of prayer, of elevation, of spirituality. That's what it be called for the entire world. And Shlomo Gronich, the famous Israeli singer, wrote this with those words that says, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim. Ya Elah, 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 Ya Elah, 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 Ya Elah, 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 Ya Elah, Elah, Elah. One more time. Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim, Ki beiti betfilah yikare lechol ha'amim. Ya Elah, 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 Ya Elah, 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 So with that, we hope I'm reading that Rabbi Fred said, ipldmv.org vote, right? Exactly, the slash, yes. Make sure that we all do that, and also that we all remember that we are not alone in this world, that the sukkah, it brings us together one more time. If we had, if the makot that we are receiving are not enough to understand that we are all in this together, perhaps the sukkah would. So with that, being faithful to the fact that it's 7:02, I want to say to everybody, Laila Tov. May you have a wonderful evening. I want to remind you that tomorrow night we are having with us, I think she is here,
Yes.
Pnina Motro, who's going to be talking to us about Eliezer Ben Yehuda, the creator of modern Hebrew, a man that believed in language so powerfully that make his children play in Hebrew. So so with that, Pnina, we thank you. We remind everybody that at 6:30 tomorrow night, 18:30 in other places, that we will be here again for Ushpizin. And until then, I hope that you continue exploring the ideas that Rabbi Fred so beautifully brought us together tonight. Laila Tov, everybody.
Laila Tov, thank you, Fred. Beautiful.
Honored to be with you all. Thanks.
Really a
Ours.
pleasure.
תזכה למצוות.